Oklahoma is the land of second chances. Who were the people that made it so? We'll dig for the golden threads they've woven through Oklahoma history. The Red River Institute is proud to present Oklahoma Gold. I'm Gwen Falconer Lippert, along with award-winning author and Southern Nazarene University historian John J. Dwyer. We'll find the golden nuggets of Oklahoma history here now. Oklahoma Gold. Masking up in Oklahoma. John J. Dwyer, tell me the story.
Well, Gwen, a lot of folks might be surprised to learn that this isn't the first time here in Oklahoma that we've experienced such things as having to put on a mask, having to be careful who you're around, dread at being around the wrong person, tragedy and sorrow at losing people or having people we care about fall ill that were previously perfectly healthy. Just over a century ago, Gwen, 1917 and 1918, at the end and coming out of World War I, one of the greatest epidemics, and I use the word great in terms of magnitude, not that it was anything good, it was horrendous. One of the greatest epidemics, pandemics in world history occurred, the fearsome Spanish influenza. This is a situation where already, Gwen, Oklahomans had been subjected to the most brutal war in history to that point. It was the First World War, the first time that truly nations from all over the world battled on opposing sides and sometimes switching sides as they went. World War I was a catastrophe in which more than 10 million people died. Scores of millions of people were injured, wounded, maimed, psychologically scarred. And then as if, kind of a satanic insult added to injury, on the back heels of the war, Gwen, this horrific Spanish influenza took root. Now, we're going to talk in a little while about where it took root, which is rather surprising in itself. And it wasn't in Spain. The reason that the name Spanish has been attached to it is because apparently the Spanish media of the time were the ones that first were alert, on the ball, and they caught hold of just how significant and widespread this was. And just to give you an idea, in Oklahoma, Gwen, over 1,000 Oklahoma soldiers died in World War I. Between 6 and 7 times that number of Oklahomans on the home front, but many of them soldiers who were in Army bases died. So you had World War I is rightly remembered as a catastrophic event for the nation and for the state of Oklahoma, where you had over 1,000 men die in just a little bit over a year of active combat duty in Europe for Oklahomans. But then you had 6 to 7 times that number died horribly in groups and scores of people. We hear about COVID-19 and we know about it. Some of us, including myself, have already had it. And typically most of us, when we have an experience of it, it might go through an area. We hear of it going through a nursing home. That's maybe one of the worst and most horrifying experiences we've had in Oklahoma with COVID-19. And you might have 5, 10, 15, 20 people die, others be afflicted. Well, this Spanish influenza would tear through a community, and you would have dozens, you would have hundreds die. Sometimes you would have thousands die. Over 100 million people worldwide died, Gwen, with the Spanish influenza in 1917, 1918. Some historians call it the greatest medical holocaust in history. So, don't know if that prompts any thoughts on your part as far as questions on connections or anything between the Spanish flu and today, but We might talk about maybe comparisons or similarities or differences.
6 to 7 times the number of people died from the Spanish flu than from the war?
Yes. And one of the sad things about that, Gwen, is many of the people that died of the Spanish flu were actually soldiers, including many Oklahoma soldiers that died on bases where it would take hold. And in fact, there's a very gripping quote from Juliana Keeping, an Oklahoma newspaper reporter, that maybe when we come back from the break I can share that with everybody.
So where did the Spanish flu really start?
Well, we're gonna kind of save that as a little bit of a surprise when we get to I believe we're calling it our golden thread of Oklahoma gold here in a few minutes.
Yes. So you picked the Spanish flu because it is similar to COVID-19, just in the way it's a virus and it's taking out people. And did they control it or try to through the masks?
Yeah, there were, of course, a lot of things that they tried to do at that time. And as you can imagine, a century ago, they were totally outmatched as far as coming up with medications. I know that there's a lot of debate right now on regarding current medications that a lot of folks are saying are helping them already with the virus. And then, of course, the government is working hard to come up with a vaccine specifically for it. But at that time, it was more a situation where when it hit a place, you just tried to stay away and you tried your best not to get infected with it. One of my friends, who's a Vietnam War veteran, he had two grandfathers, one of whom came down with the Spanish flu. The other went to town to get groceries and medications and so forth. And by the time he got back, the first one had died. And within 3 days, the second grandfather had died, just taking out a whole swath of the family in a number of few days there. So
they tried social distancing. They just didn't probably take it as seriously?
Well, I think that people were stunned. Here's a quote from this article in the Oklahoma newspaper from a few years ago. It talks about how the epidemic hit America's East Coast like a bomb. At Camp Devens in Boston, 1,500 soldiers reported ill with the influenza in one day. In a letter to a colleague, a doctor at the Post described how the flu turned into the most vicious type of pneumonia he'd ever seen. The faces and bodies of dying victims turned blue from the lack of oxygen, sparking rumors that the Black Death, a terrifying plague from the Middle Ages, had returned. Healthy men dropped dead within a matter of hours, hundreds in a day, some of them bleeding from the eyes. So one thing I think we see is it hit, struck, and killed people a lot quicker than COVID-19 usually does.
We're masking up in Oklahoma. That's Oklahoma Gold, dignifying our history by telling their stories. The Golden Thread, after this. So Oklahoma and the fearsome Spanish influenza is our Oklahoma gold today. I wonder what the golden thread could be, because the clues I have, 6 to 7 times the number of people died from the Spanish influenza than war. It was like a medical holocaust, and it happened in 1917 and 18, and they were wearing masks. So, John J. Dwyer, how can you stitch yesterday to today?
Well, great question, Gwen. It is amazing, as we've been talking about, how amidst this memorable and really notorious, infamous year of 2020 with a pandemic like most of us have never been a part of. And for those that are young, I would encourage you to not feel shaken, because this is not something that just has happened in your parents' lifetime once or twice, or your grandparents. This hasn't happened before. The closest thing to it was over a century ago, the Spanish flu, coming on the heels of the end of World War I. It was just one of the many sad dividends of the most powerful nations in the world not finding peaceful ways to work out their differences. And we look back, Gwen, in retrospect, the reasons for World War I wear real thin with the passage of time. There was a lot of pride involved. There were disputes. There were massed armies where, wow, we built the bombs, we built our armies, we got them in front of each other, and wow, there's nothing left to do but fight. Well, too bad they didn't make other decisions. There were horrific consequences. Not least is World War II, we know now, was pretty directly caused by World War I. A number of reasons, not least the Germans being crushed down so hard, Hitler arising as their savior, and then here we go, a couple of decades later in a new war. Well, one of the other dividends was this Spanish flu that arose out of the maelstrom of World War II. So let's talk about a little bit more specifically on the home front in Oklahoma, because that's what we like to do. We like to talk about American history and world history. We like to bring it home. That's what we do that most other folks don't, Gwen. Well, in Oklahoma, the first reported case of Spanish flu in Oklahoma City was a young woman named Corrine Smith, who was diagnosed September 28, 1918. So that was still before the armistice that ended World War I. And yet, by October 1st, Gwen, that's 3 days later, Oklahoma City doctors were dealing with more than 1,000 cases of flu. 2 days later, just in OKC, the number was 2,000. So another dividend of the war, we were talking about a moment ago, was that the mounting death toll of the flu in Oklahoma was exacerbated because so many of the state's doctors and nurses were gone. They had left and were on the foreign fields in France and Germany and Europe, taking care of our soldiers. So imagine this, out of nowhere you have one of the greatest epidemics in world history besets you, and across the world, across the nation, across Oklahoma, almost immediately getting down to the smallest towns we had as well as the largest ones, and most of your doctors and nurses are gone. So talk about being left to fend for yourselves with something that you don't even know what it is. We talked about a little bit earlier how, unlike COVID, even though there are certainly cases of people that COVID seems to come on them quickly and overtake them, leading to death, most COVID cases that are fatal, they say take a period of weeks for that when you look back to when it actually got into their system. Well, this horrific Spanish flu, it just jumped on people, and within a day or two, sometimes hours, they had this horrific respiratory problems and pain and bleeding and loss of circulation, and they were dead. One example, just to bring it really down to the, put the cookies on the lower shelf here, if you will, as far as what was it like in a typical Oklahoma community. Tahlequah, capital of the Cherokee Nation, they averaged between 5 and 7 people per month died in 1918 leading up to the flu. Well, during the first 4 months of the flu, between 20 and 30 people died every month in Tahlequah, multiple times the normal death toll. You mentioned the golden thread, but believe it or not, most historians now suggest that the Spanish flu began just across the Oklahoma state line in Haskell County, Kansas, in an Army base.
Kansas.
Haskell County, Kansas, just a few miles north of Enid in that area of northwest Oklahoma. The first death of the Spanish flu in Oklahoma, in the state of Oklahoma, a Muskogee attorney named Norman Haskell. That's right, Haskell County, Kansas, where it started. Norman Haskell dies, and just to add to the thread, the son of none other than Oklahoma's first governor, just a few years before that, Charles Haskell.
The Spanish flu took it away.
We have been masked before.
That's Oklahoma Gold.